After literally years of speculation, rumors, and that one weird guy on Reddit who swore his cousin worked at Tecmo, Nioh 3 is officially dropping February 6, 2026 on PlayStation 5 and PC via Steam. And if the demo's any indication, we're in for what might be the most batshit insane evolution of the series yet. Sit on back, let's discuss Nioh 3. As always, subscribe, leave a follow. We give away codes when we can to people who are commenting or subscribing. Let's kick this off with the absolute basics because some of the nerds probably skipped right to the end to see if I mentioned their favorite historical figure. Nioh 3 is being developed by Team Ninja's main studio division, which marks the first game in the series without involvement from Omega Force and Sony's publisher. The director who steered the previous games is now serving as general producer, while another takes over the lead director role. This means we're getting what sounds like a much more focused vision for where the series is actually heading, and some big changes when it comes to the creation. And just like any creation, there's always a good creation myth or starting. So let's talk about the story setup here, which is some grade A historical fiction friggin' nonsense that only Nioh could probably pull off with a straight face. You're playing as the grandson of the Shogun and basically on the verge of being declared Shogun when your younger brother gets pissy about the pecking order, falls into darkness like some emo teenagers who just discovered My Chemical Romance and starts leading a horde of demons against you. It's basically Game of Thrones meets Japanese history with extra demons, and I'm absolutely here for some family drama bullshit where swords are therapists. What makes this particularly crazy is that you can see guardian spirits, which apparently made the household think you were a weirdo. But just like any normal person would do, that means you leap into a time-traveling warp following your spirit guardian. That means we are now getting time-traveling shenanigans across multiple Japanese historical periods, all across all the different ones, meeting historical characters and most likely not being incredibly accurate. Let's get to the actual gameplay changes because, holy shit, Team Ninja decided to reinvent the wheel a bit here. The biggest and most insane change is dual combat style systems, Samurai and Ninja. These aren't just different stances or weapon choices, they're completely separate combat philosophies with their own equipment, mechanics, and playstyles that you can switch between to on the fly even mid-combo, and basically should. This is like going from being really good at one instrument to being a virtuoso at two completely different instruments and swapping between them during a concert. So if you've ever seen anybody wail perfectly on the piano, then switch to the fucking trombone. Actually, this sounds ridiculous. What about the violin and the drums, or the guitar and the xylophone? Who knows, but it still sounds awesome. For example, Samurai style is basically traditional Nioh combat with some new sprinkles on top. You've got your three weapon stances, high, medium, and low, with the depth that you would expect. And there's a new arts proficiency gauge that builds up as you kick the shit out of enemies, and that lets you unleash bigger attacks when it's full. There's also a new parrying mechanic here because apparently parrying is mandatory for every action game now. But in all honesty, Team Ninja, they know what they're doing. This will actually require timing and skill rather than just being cinematic, press X to awesome. So if you're an old school grognard who just loves slamming people with a samurai sword, that's your thing. But the real wild card here is Ninja style, which throws out several Nioh traditions in favor of something that feels like Team Ninja's entire Ninja Gaiden DNA finally exploded into the Nioh universe. Ninja style has no weapon stances. Instead, you equip 3 different ninja tools that you can swap between on the fly. More importantly, there's no key pulse in Ninja style, which is a bit like removing the brakes and the seatbelt from a car and just saying, figure it out, especially if it's one you drove already, because, you know, you're accustomed to it. Ninja gets the mist mechanic instead, which lets you create a duplicate of yourself to distract enemies while you dash behind them for some massive slashes and strikes and hopefully some backstabs. Ninja style is all about aerial combat as well, evasion and hit and run tactics. You've got enhanced mobility, you have bonus backstab damage and weapons that excel at vertical attacks and aerial combos. And also you can jump and double jump in Nioh. That's a thing now because why the hell not? The real brilliant part here is that these styles are designed to complement each other and not just give you 2 separate ways to play. Burst counters, which are introduced in Nioh 2, are now tied to switching between styles. You need to shift stance to counter enemy attacks, which means you're consistently encouraged to flip between samurai and ninja modes. This creates a really fluid, high-risk, high-reward combat flow where you might start a fight in samurai style to build your arts proficiency, switch to ninja to dodge a massive attack with some different fancy aerial vertical moves, and then counter back into samurai stance to unleash a powered-up attack. It's like trying to rub your stomach while patting your head and juggling chainsaws, only instead of looking like an idiot, you look like the most badass dude in Japan ever, even if it's a completely fictional fantasy one. The open world design is another huge departure from the previous games, and you'll be going around it, well, whenever you're not beating the shit out of somebody. Nioh 1 and 2 had perfectly crafted linear missions with the occasional optional branch. They were like those detailed dioramas where everything's placed exactly where it needs to be, which led to some fantastic combat, but familiarity that definitely crept in. Nioh 3, on the other hand, has embraced what Team Ninjas call an open field, which sounds like a fancy way of saying they're getting proper explorable environments rather than disconnected missions and locations. The alpha demo did show off some areas and included side objectives, points of interest, and challenges that were scattered around that part of the map. There's also shrines to discover, which now unlock fast travel points just by getting near them. Enemy camps to clear out, and crucible spikes. These are sealed off combat arenas with multiple enemy waves that reward you with spirit force upgrades and new skills whenever you complete them cleanly. To realize something, though, this isn't quite the typical open world that you've seen before or that you might be a bit sick of. It's more like structured open areas. You've still got the tight claustrophobic level design that Nioh excels at in places like the Crucible zones and other places within the map, and they're linear areas with shortcuts and checkpoints that feel like classic Nioh levels. But connecting all this are these larger exploration zones that give you a bit of that breathing room and actual choice in how you approach it. So not only are you choosing between ninja and samurai, how you build your gauge and how you burn it, but also in the ability for you to just decide if you want to engage in combat or not for a bit. The verticality is greatly enhanced thanks to a new jump mechanic, as I said before, and a stealth system, which actually seems pretty viable, unlike in previous games where it was more of a suggestion or opinion, or sometimes pretty much not usable at all. Exploration should feel genuinely rewarding here. Every time you complete one of these points of interest, you also grow an exploration level, which increases, and each increase gives you more bonuses. That means that actually taking the time to explore off the beaten path pays off in tangible ways. The fact that exploration levels also unlock better rewards and more abilities means that you won't just be doing it for the satisfaction of some weird part of your brain that gets off from seeing 100% completion rates, but also just, likes to explore sometimes and take a moment away from the combat. And if you don't have to. What's actually interesting here is how the open field design affects the core gameplay loop. In previous Nioh games, you were just encouraged to fight every single enemy because you wanted sweet energy for leveling up, and the shrines were frequent enough that death wasn't too punishing. Also, many of those places could feel a bit like a cave with the top of the cave cut off. Everything could feel very closed in. In Nioh 3, the map in the alpha demo was roughly the size of the 2 to 3 full missions from the previous games, but it only had 7 shrines, 2 of which were locked until after you beat the boss. Suddenly, the decision to engage with the enemies, to move around, to understand what treasure chest you want to go investigate are all decisions that consistently come up no matter what you're doing. Do you use that new stealth skill to sneak past enemies, maybe come back later when you're better equipped? That tension there and meaningful choice wasn't really present in the prior games, and I like the idea of it. Also, when you explore, when you fight enemies, you're getting loot, and if it's not great, well, the game's just not going to be fun. Let's be real here, the Nioh games have always had a bit of a Diablo-style loot addiction where you're consistently picking up different pieces of gear with slightly different stats, and by the end game, you're spending more time in menus than actually playing. The alpha demo showed off some changes that make this manageable, including an auto-optimized gear button that lets you optimize by different ranks. So you can literally just hit a button and the game's going to equip that best gear. Got to admit, that's pretty awesome. Here's the thing that's truly keeping me up a little bit, though. Everything we've seen so far scratches a bit of an itch, but it also doesn't scratch the surface of what they seem to be offering. What other historical eras lie in wait for you? What are you going to be able to explore? The when and the how. We already know that there's at least 4 major eras, but how deep do they go? How deep does the time traveling mechanic actually go? And what implications does that have not only for the combat and the systems, depending on the time frame, but also just the story? I also want to point out this. More concerning is that we haven't actually got to see any friggin' late game stuff at all. And late game is what transforms Nioh from challenging to legitimate test of human endurance, both mentally and physically. And for example, will that feed off of the Crucible enemies? In the alpha demo we got to see, they had some pretty significant difficulty spikes, suggesting the final release might contain some encounters that make previous series finales look like training exercises. You've also got the co-op system now, which is going to have 3 players who can go off and explore together. That's a step up. I absolutely love that change. Speaking of changes, something that hasn't, this is currently just for PS5 and PC at launch, again scheduled for February 6th. There's no real announcement at all about the Switch or the Xbox. The series historically sells around 90 to 10% when it comes to in favor of West versus everybody else. And the new strategy seems to be clearly get the largest two platforms first. Don't pretend we can ship anywhere else cleanly. I do want to beg them to actually ship a PC version that's not allergic to CPUs. The devs have acknowledged that they have some optimization issues, and those are under the microscope right now, especially after Ronin's issues in the past. The demo did give us some real idea of how it was playing at that time, and they've made some switches because of the feedback there already, which is great. The game also, at least for me from a graphical standpoint, just really looks good despite those couple performance issues. Team Ninja's art style has always been taking a museum rack of historical references and bolting nightmare demon creature antlers to them, and that hasn't really gone anywhere. If anything, giving them multiple eras makes the contrasts land harder. I cannot wait to see the different enemies and different characters that you meet across the different time frames. What's more interesting than raw fidelity, though, is how well those visuals are going to be tuned to the new movement profile and what changes those are going to make to the feel of the game, especially because changing stances is so important, and you're going to want to make sure this is smooth as hell. And it also just brings up this thing. When you look at it, Samurai is the old gospel. It's stance work, measured steps, key management, like payments you have to make at every specific time. The feeling of being an actual samurai, but you're consistently paying for the costume. Ninja's the devil on your shoulder with a jump button and a penchant for aerials. You can switch on a dime, mid-string, all that. The point, though, when you play as these two is to not cosplay versatile. How is it all going to end up coming together? And is it going to feel like, well, technically the switch button is really just a replacement for something else? The point is to hold those two contradictory rhythms in your hands and be able to not only force yourself to choose right or left, but at times make a decision that may seem counterintuitive. Maybe you stay in one for a little longer than you would expect. Maybe you don't switch into the other, depending on what enemies you're fighting and facing and what weapons you have. I love the idea of this, but that performance is going to have to be rock solid for doing these kinds of switches. And I'm hoping there's no real leg there. It's dangerously cool when it comes to an idea because it sounds like freedom. And when combined with the open field idea, there's a lot going on. When it comes to the end game, though, we don't know exactly how it's all going to fit together. I want to jump into Nioh and play it. I want to be able to jump in with total of 3 people and explore everywhere. But that entire time you're doing so, when you're engaging with this dual stance system, if it's not enjoyable, it's going to all fall apart. Do I think it'll fall apart? No, probably not. They know what they're doing, and if Rise of the Ronin is any indication, they've already had their failure and it's in the past. Yeah, I said it. Seriously, though, Nioh is an excellent series of games, and it looks like 3 is a good idea. It's also a very specific promise that seems to be kept. Not easier, not kinder. What a sequel should be when you get a studio that's old enough to admit what's good is not only continuing the pattern that you had prior, but sometimes doing something a bit reckless. And I love the duality there when it comes to the different stances that you're going to do. Do you go out there and you take them down with that samurai that you probably know and love and understand the feel of? Or do you leap in with a pissy-ass ninja? Go for some stealth and try different styles of attacks that we really haven't seen in the past. The changes to exploration and the world distance and moments of downtime or respite could be fantastic additions as well to keep the ebb and flow versus just pegging those adrenal glands so they're just juicing out, just squirting a bunch of adrenaline until you finally just end up a little too tired or a little too worn down, or it feels a little too messy. The ideas here and the splits seem like a really good plan. Different weapons for the different character styles. I like that idea. Everything I've seen here feels like they know what they're doing. They just have to really end up bringing it home, because as we've seen with other games, many other games by amazing studios and studios we've never heard before, that end part, that finishing of the run, that completion of the marathon, what really matters is that last like quarter mile, and they are very close to being in it. I will say one thing I do worry about a little bit is if the open areas are a little too open or just a little messy, it may end up not feeling as cohesive as a game, because when you look at Nioh 2, that game was really absolutely removed of anything raw, and it was a very well filtered, discrete situation that you went into every single time. Every enemy encounter, it really did feel like it was methodically placed and tested. When you get open spaces, there's a lot more area for miscommunication from the player, for them thinking that an enemy in a particular place should be taken on in a particular style. They've already stated that's not how this game's going to play. That's it for me. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike it, give it a thumbs down. Check out the Substack where I talk about cool stuff that's going on in gaming, leaks, different hardware decisions, all the stuff that's gone on in the history of games, and just have some funny stories. Leave a comment. As you guys know, we like to give out games to people in the comments and who are subscribers. Peace out, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. Check out the other previews coming from me soon.